These are my extended interviews with Chris Gliddon and Russ, two of Club Penguin's developers. Segments of this were used in my Club Penguin Ninja Experience video. With Chris, I talk about the decline of Club Penguin, its eventual closure, and its successor, Club Penguin Island, and with Russ, we talk about the development of the PSA missions, in addition to the ninja content you saw in those videos. Enjoy! So I'm here with Chris Gliddon, real name Polo Field. He was among the earliest staff members on Club Penguin. He was hired in 2006 as a support rep, and then he eventually joined the development team, and then eventually he became the head of Club Penguin's social media before leaving in 2015. So, hi Chris.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
My first question is going way back to the beginning. How did you become attached to Club Penguin?
Well, at that time, because I've got a young kid, and so my oldest daughter was friends with another one of the, basically in the neighborhood, there was, her name was Super Sheep, and her kid played with my kid. And so she was previously working at Starbucks, and then she got a job at this Penguin thing. And at the time I was working as an accountant. So I was doing the boring work of I got to reconcile this down to a penny. But on the side, in between parenting and that, I was doing web design and writing. So I was doing spending a lot of time just reviewing albums, interviewing bands, and all the rest of it. And so that's where I got my chops writing kind of sharply. In music journalism, you kind of have to be quite cutting. Nowadays, it's become more commonplace to do kind of clickbaity writing. But that's kind of what we did, was you want to elicit a response out of somebody who's like, what? How come you said that? And so part of it was just making up stuff. One of the music publications I wrote for made up a fake music festival, and then it made the rounds on all these bands and artists and everything started talking about it. So it actually taught me about how to catch someone's attention with text. And so I think that sort of helped me stand out. So at the time, she's like, well, why don't you come over and join Penguin? And so I signed up myself, and I felt kind of weird about it. So I signed up my daughter as well. And I did what you shouldn't have done, which is I put her age in the name. So it was, and it was her middle name as well. So it was she's got her username is her middle name plus her age, which is totally broke the rules right at the beginning. But I didn't know the rules. I didn't really get it at the time. And so I walked around, I logged on, and I was like, this feels kind of weird. I don't know. And so I had to have somebody explain it to me a little bit. And that's how I kind of became attached to Club Penguin, is they said, hey, why don't you come in? At the time, they just needed a warm body of people who could write well to respond to emails, and they just had so much work to get through. They were just hiring any Starbucks rep that they knew that was good. They would hire the best ones they could. They poached all these Starbucks employees because basically we just needed people to keep up with the sheer volume of all these emails coming in, right? So it became this we need people. And so for me, I just stood out because there were a lot of folks that were pretty young, and I was older at the time. When I joined, I was 27. So that was a senior citizen to the team. There was a lot of team members that were 20, 19, 21. And even when I was working at Penguin, I was working on reviewing bands and whatnot on the side still. So I was still wanting to create. And so when the opportunity came up to hey, do you want to join the QA team? I was like, heck yes, I'll do anything but do support. I would love to just get into making stuff rather than, little did I know that QA is actually very tedious and totally not my personality, which is throw the snowball in every one of the 8 directions. Did it work? Yes. Did it work? No. Did it work? Yes. Did it work? No. It's kind of the poor man's QA was kind of the version that we were doing at the time. It wasn't anything crazy sophisticated with automation or anything like that yet. So at the time, it was very, very homebrew. It was a small dev team. We were in one room, and it was we were kind of the last add-ons that could fit in the development room. At the time, we were all on one floor. Originally, it was here's the support team over here, here's office and admin over there, and here's the development team. And all the development team basically fit into one room. And so they just needed to put us on temporary tables. So we were on plastic Costco tables. And that was, my seat was just here behind one of the artists over there. That's where I kind of got started joining the QA team. Originally, that was my first thing. I was one of the, I replaced one QA member who was going back to school. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, why don't you join this new writing team? And we'll start a new writing department, the editorial team, which I eventually then took over, and I managed the team. And that was the team responsible for the story. So our team would do basically the newspaper, everything that text touched. So from the scripts that Rockhopper would say when he walked around, to the Club Penguin Times, to eventually the blog, all of it would fall under that umbrella. And then eventually I just shifted to focusing just on community, which of course encompassed social media and whatnot. So it was kind of that cover of the two. But during that time of covering story, that's where, like, just before going into leading the team, I started working on Cardjitsu. So that's kind of brings you to 2008, the summer of 2008. I was basically, at the beginning, there was an editorial manager and a writer. I was the lead writer, and then we hired another writer. And then, so I was a writer for about a year, and then I moved up to leading that team. So then now I had the writers, like, I was trying to help them do their best work, which sometimes I helped them with, but most of the time not. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, that leads to Cardjitsu. Right. So Cardjitsu is right around the time where we started working on it, is when I moved roles. So Cardjitsu was actually one of my last working as a writer projects. Was the first Cardjitsu, the launch of the card game and everything. So,
all right. Just a second. Let me adjust the camera setting up here.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. It's not on the questions. I wanted to ask you, the other Club Penguin, Chris Hendricks, he released like a series of videos about like the history, and he talked about like the original 7 developers or whatever were like, met at a plaza or something. Were you among the very original 7?
No, like the original 7. Oh man, I didn't even have to count back as to who was on the team at that point. But I joined November 2006, so I'm way later. Like I came in I was like employee 50 or something like that. So I was a little bit further down the scale of number of people coming in to join the team. But yeah, like I think because I had so much experience with editorial, it was easier to stand out. I'd spent a lot of time writing, so it wasn't as much of a challenge for me to dive into writing a support email, and it was fun too, because people would write, you'd be like, hey, I named my Puffle Stinky Pants. Isn't that cool? I'd be like, yeah, that's awesome, man. You named your Puffle Stinky Pants. That's awesome. I named my Puffle Stinky Pants too because of you. Hope you have a great time on Penguin. See you later.
The little kids were just writing you whatever thoughts they had, basically, and you were
a little bit
to them.
Yeah, and they'd ask questions. Like if it was a young you, like you would write in and you'd write us a support email. And I don't know if you ever wrote a support email, but there were real humans with that. But... Well, there was like kind of a community that was built that way, in that we were writing back and forth to people, right? So like I would basically just dive right into like, going, hey, you're awesome, check it out. And that was part of what I'm most passionate about with Penguin, is supporting kids. Because when I was a kid, I wrote this big design document. I wrote this Medium post about it. I wrote a design document with my buddy, and we sent it to Nintendo. It's like, here's all our art. Here's the design document. We were 11 years old. We're like, here you go. Here's the design. Here's the levels. Like yeah. And so we did that. I tried to design
a Mario Kart, and then I looked at those old papers like a few months ago. I was like, what is this?
That's awesome. You should show me what you got. Anyways, I sent that into Nintendo, and they sent me a letter back, but it was a stock letter. I know that now, but at the time as a kid, man, I tell you, like 11 years old, and you get a letter back from Nintendo that says, hey, Jason, hey, Chris, great job. Thanks for sending us your ideas. Oh my goodness, Nintendo wrote me a letter. This is amazing. And so to me, I always wanted every kid to have that kind of vibe from us, right? I wanted kids to be excited to write into us, and for us to like just turn their dreams into reality. And so that's kind of always been my passion with the whole project, right? So
that's awesome. Next, I wanted to ask, we're at Cardjitsu now. You have a great video kind of covering the conception of that, so we can basically move on to the sequels. Why did the Club Penguin team decide to launch 3 follow-ups to Cardjitsu?
I think it was just at the time, Cardjitsu ended up really successful. And largely because of the fact that there was a tie-in between the physical cards to the in-game, and it was finally delivering upon a myth, right? So we'd gone and we'd done all the work to go, hey, these are all the things that people think that could be the ninjas, because they had launched in 2000, whatever, 2004, 2003, I think is when this secret ninja shows up in Penguin Chat 3. Go ahead and
Yeah,
check me on the exact
something like
dates,
that.
because it's starting to get fuzzy for me, just as I fill my brain with new data. But at the time, because there was all this myth, we had a whole bunch of lead up to it. People were excited. We had initially planned it for 2005. Like Lance wanted to launch ninjas right away. But we decided that actually we need some activities for like more feminine players, right? Like girls and feminine players. So that's why we leaned into doing Puffles first. And so we put ninjas on the shelf. So 2008 was just delivering upon the dream, and had been built up for that many years of, fan mythology and all the sort of headcanon that gets thrown around kids' brains. It was awesome. So because it was such a huge success, it was basically Cardjitsu just skyrocketed to the #1 game. Like before, it was like sort of Sled Racer was your top, and your sort of your Kart Surfer, like all the games you would expect in your data to be the top games, right? Those ended up, Cardjitsu just showed up and was like, bam. And it was because if you think about it, it was the only game that really let you, at the time, it was the only game that let you earn items. So you could earn any player could earn all the belts and earn the ninja outfit, right? That was pretty special. So that really made that the data just, it's like comparing apples to oranges. It was so much bigger than everything else. And you look at that and you're like, well, I guess people want more journeys, right? They're like, I want more quests, more stuff. Like people just wanted to do more ninja adventures, right? And because we set up the hideout to be sort of like, we just had these ideas that we would continue on, that you would get access to this special room to prove that you got there, right? So you get to the ninja hideout and it proves that only the people in this room are black belts, right? So it's kind of special. It was like kind of like a secret agent. You were a special player because you'd made it that far. And so, it just naturally introduced the idea of like, well, what's next? But even then, we kind of knew we wanted to do it anyways, just because we love ninjas and we just think it's fun. And when we concepted the art, I mean, you could try and talk to the twins. When they concepted the room, it basically had this sort of implied other places, because we made this thing like the amulet was sort of on the ground. We had this idea that you would have to get different gems, and that sort of introduced this idea of like, well, hey, we can do Cardjitsu Fire. I don't know why we picked fire first. I have no idea. Could be just arbitrarily out of the hat, or we just were most excited about it. I don't know. I mean, at the time, it was just, hey, what if we could take the game that we made, which is a card game, and make other games off of it. So it actually started as a board game. Cardjitsu Fire was originally like a paper prototype that Good Tea / Troy, he made this like cardboard piece, and we'd go and we would play this prototype, and we would walk around. It looked a little bit like Monopoly, actually. It was like squares, like, every kid when they're first designing a board game designs Monopoly. I don't know if you did the same. Did you ever design a Monopoly?
Never really did board games. I was more
Yeah.
into like writing shows and then some like video game stuff.
Right. Okay. So anyways, like Monopoly was kind of the initial. It's like, okay, well, what about the idea of moving a character around, adding that on top of the cards? And so I think Fire just emerged from that. It's like, well, I guess we could be on top of a volcano and like moving around the stones on top of like, lava, and it's all hot and tense. So it's like, it's like a level up from the regular Cardjitsu because it's more intense. So I think we liked the idea that it was a step up, whereas like water and snow kind of almost sound more passive. Like as a storyteller, you're like, when you think of fire, you think hot, intense, you think of the words that pop to your mind, right? So kind of, I think that might have been one of the reasons. I'm just speculating at this point, but I think that was one of the reasons we kind of found our way into fire as the first element to explore. The problem is we really struggled with what's the story lead up to this? Like, how does it even make sense? Why is this happening? Why did it take so long? Like all those kinds of things that we would spend significant energy thinking about and debating about between all the team members. took us a while to actually land on it. And in fact, actually, the story for Cardjutsu Fire, we were just not getting there. Like the game team, like we had a mini game team that was dedicated to just mini games and missions. So that's all that team did. They would focus on level design, coding the games, coming up with the concepts, and maybe a story pitch. And the pitches that they were bringing back for Cardjutsu Fire were just not working for the team. Like I know, like it just wasn't hitting it for Billy Bob. So Cardjutsu Fire, when we launched it, it was basically like the team kept fighting to get the right idea out, and it just wasn't landing. And I remember I basically pulled an all-nighter and was just like, what could this be? What could this be? And I just made some pitch deck, and then I just ran like Lane and some others through my story pitch for the idea of Fire, and it hinged on the fires in Club Penguin HQ's hometown, Kelowna, BC, which is a temperate desert. So it's actually kind of like there's a strip up the side of the US that goes from like the wine country of California up to us. So it's actually the hottest place in Canada. Just fun fact, it's a desert. And so we often have forest fires. And when the forest fires happen, when there's a big one, the entire sky turns orange. And so that's what I kind of drew from for the Cardjutsu Fire story. The problem is we ended up with so many bugs in Cardjutsu Fire that we had to go through and fix all the bugs before we could launch it. So we had planned to launch it at a certain time. I think it was September of 2009, but there were so many bugs that QA was like, nope, can't launch it. And so we just, with the fire, the orange sky of the world just stayed up there forever. And then we basically were just like, are we just going to leave it orange sky for like 3 months until you guys finish QAing and fixing the bugs of this game? Like, are we ever going to launch it? What's going to happen? So eventually we took the orange sky down, which was even super confusing, but it was the idea that was like the volcanoes erupted, there's fire, so thus the sky turns to orange. It just makes sense. It's a fiery sky, right? And that was kind of the beginning of us finding the idea of like changing the sky color based on what ninja you are. So that was that first origin of like, I could turn the sky fire by, doing the fire dance, which we introduced later. But and so there's this funny time in history where it's like orange sky and then no orange sky, and then it's just blue sky for a while, and then ta-da, here's Cardjutsu Fire. Anyways, that was kind of internal problems that we had at the time that delayed that game. So that's a little bit about Fire. So what were the bugs? I know there was localization bugs. Water really struggled with Flash because Flash would run on a single core of your processor. So it would just struggle to draw all the vector lines because there's so much animation happening on the screen. There's like these lines. And so like it was just crazy slow on some people's computers, right? Especially if you didn't have a decent GPU. It just really struggled.
The average family's computer was probably so slow that like every kid fell off the waterfall no matter what. So it was just kind of it wasn't really about skill. It was about whose computer was faster.
Yeah, kind of a little bit. I've talked to some people that are like, I didn't have any issues with water. I was like, okay, well, you probably had a decent computer.
Yeah.
But also it's just Flash. Flash was struggling. Like that's the beginning of us realizing that we were starting to like bump our heads on the limitations of Flash. Even back in 2009, we're like, especially 2010 when it came to water, we were just bumping our heads against that wall. It was just slow, so there's performance issues. We also had like all the localization pieces, because if you think about the original Cardjutsu, we built it before we did translation. So suddenly everything became more complicated. We had to coordinate with global teams. There were a lot of people around the world. We had to get strings back and forth. We had to coordinate getting those strings into the database. And it just, we struggled a bit. So, yeah.
All right. Then I asked, what was the team's process when developing the Cardjutsu games? I might as well ask, if you remember, how did you guys come up with the idea of the waterfall where you have to get to the front of it?
Yeah, the fun fact is like each of those games, like for Cardjutsu, as we got into like after Fire, each of the games, there was a ton of scrutiny. So the team, if when you talk to Russ, you can talk to him about his prototype process in the mini games team, because he was a member of that team. And they would come up with a prototype and they'd be like, hey, what do you think of this? And they'd be like, no, I don't like it. So there were just a lot of like, the stakes were too high at that point, right? It was the big flagship game for Penguin, and we just needed to get it right. So we were a lot more hard on the ideas at that time. Like, we were not willing to just accept any old idea. Water originally was more sort of peaceful, zen-like, like you go to the spot. And then there was a lot of tension about, do we make Karjitsu, do we lean into the comedy, which is really Lance. Lance is like, just loves his comedy. Or do you go into like the cool factor of like, I'm a ninja and it's secretive and I'm powerful? Like, which one do you go into? And what's the recipe? What percentage is comedy versus, power? Like that kind of interesting tension. And in the beginning of Water, it was a much more sort of quiet, passive, serene. It was like, no, this needs to be powerful and intense, da da da. And so that was kind of, Water didn't initially start as that waterfall idea, and that was brought into like, you need some sort of like emotional tension, like some sort of like, as you're playing it, like, the stakes are higher because you're on the top of the waterfall and it's like, oh, you could fall off the waterfall, need to hurry, and there's a timer. It was to increase a sense of urgency, right? But unfortunately Flash failed us. So we didn't have the dream game that we wanted from that. So
I love the super dramatic water dojo, and then meanwhile there's just little penguins throwing water balloons at each other. I love like the contrast between the epic and then just the goofy fun. When you're a kid, you don't realize how funny it is. You take it all seriously, and then you get older and you appreciate it more.
I am a huge fan of irony, and I think that is just one of the things that Karjitsu did just beautifully, especially the original one, because you would have like this dun, 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 dun. You have this kind of like battle music, and it's intense, and then
there's a plunger card.
Yeah, and you hit the plunger, and there's the mighty plunger, and then there's a fish, and it's totally complete Monty Python nonsense. But at the same time, it's also like playing this music, dun, 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 dun. Like, you got to battle like it's serious, and so you're left with this irony. And I think that's actually, irony is a really great creative device if you can use it. And in fact, actually, like if you look at the modern Marvel movies, they lean into that tension a bit, where it's like, this is really serious, but then they have these like moments of lightness where the character's joking around. Like, look at Guardians of the Galaxy is a great example of that, where it's sort of, the character has this level of like, and they're crazy superpowers, but then they're also like funny. And I think there's something special about comedy. I think everyone deserves to laugh. I think especially now in the pandemic, it's like, now is the time for more mighty plungers and slapped by a large trout and fire hydrants and all that kind of stuff as powerful cards. But there was definitely tension, with that. Like, even the power cards, there was a lot of like, the power card should be the most important characters. Like, Rockhopper should be the most powerful power card. But it's like, yeah, but the plunger is cool. So it was part of the tension of Karjitsu.
And you talked about in your like Club Penguin Karjitsu Origins video that basically they didn't really have like the money to like draw new things. So basically you were just grabbing like every asset from like previous newspapers or random items around the items, just throw on the cards and just like put them in the game. So basically the random, drawings you already had is basically what determined the abilities of the power cards, right?
Yeah, a little bit. And a little bit was also me just finding the funniest spins. Was like, these would be really funny cards. I know Lance really wanted the Mighty Plunger. That didn't exist in the world. We made that originally for Penguin, like for Karjitsu. Like, it wasn't even in the world anywhere. There was no plunger. He just loved the plunger. So we had to make sure we gave Rocket Snail the plunger. Like, he just really wanted the plunger card. And I was like, okay, if he likes plunger as power, let's find some of the goofiest things that would be the most unpowerful items. And that was kind of the creative approach that I took when I was picking the cards. But then there were other camps that were like, what are you doing? Like, why is the plunger the most powerful, amazing? Like, think about you're a kid, you buy a pack of cards, you want the things you love the most to be the cool foil cards. So it's kind of like, what are you doing, Polo? Like, why are you going and picking the plunger as the power card when you should be picking like the thing that most kids want, which is Rockhopper? you know, the ninja card. Like stuff that's cool is what they're going to want as the foils, right? You think about the physical cards. Like what one do you want as your Pokemon, right? You're going to pick the most powerful, coolest Pokemon to be the foils. So that was the tension with that, because then it would play out in the game. So over time, we sort of moved away from comedy power cards and into like, you know, what are the most popular characters and places, just to make sure that we gave those foil cards physically in the trading card game. So
then they got more like EPF cards where you play it and then Herbert shows up.
Yeah.
All right. So after Water, you guys moved to Cardjitsu Snow, which was by far the most different. There was a 3-year wait, and then in that wait, the 3 original co-founders had all left the company. And then like the dojo looked completely different. Like there's concept art where you line up Water, Fire, and Snow dojos and senseis in the same place, and all of them, the mats are in the same place, but then they went in a different direction with the Snow dojo, etc. So I'm curious about that. First off, why was there a big 3-year wait between Water and Snow?
It became, because those were like the flagship. We had 3 kind of flagship, I guess for lack of a better word, you could call them sub brands. Like we had Puffles, we had Ninjas, and we had Spies. So it, you know, even though resources are always finite, if you're running a business, you still have to decide, where do I spend my time? And, you know, you, even if you have a successful product, you still have this limitation, this constraint, which is how many team members do I have? And what are they working on at any given time? So over those few years, we were putting a lot more emphasis. If you look at the time overlap, a lot more emphasis was going into Puffles and Spies. So it was kind of this like, do we do Spies right now or do we do Ninjas right now? And there's this constant like tension in the triangle. Which one do we spend time on? Puffles, no. EPF, no. Puffles, yeah. And so that's why we made something like Field Ops, because we made that for the Spies to try and put Spies kind of not on hold, but we didn't have to be, it was a low scope new content push, right? So Field Ops was a very small piece of content we could put out quite easily. We had a few baked in micro games, and you just go, this micro game, this location, this thing. It became an easy system. And in fact, actually, it was just run mostly just by Cody, was on my team, the guy who basically came up with Adventure Capitalist, fun fact. And he would basically just manage that. So he'd be like, here's the new Field Up, it's in this location, and here's where the story goes. So he'd write like a little story beat for it, and then we'd drop it in a location. And that was to buy us time so we could work on other stuff. So the original design, you should ask Russ about the original Cardjitsu Snow. I don't know if it's the original, but one of the early prototypes was actually just running down a hill on a snowball. So it was actually like this big sort of snowball running game, like almost like an endless runner. Was kind of one of the early Cardjitsu Snow prototypes, and it just wasn't landing. And it was also around the same time that we were doing the work to get onto mobile, which was not a small undertaking. Like we basically had to rebuild all of Penguin, all of the assets, all of the sprites to get onto mobile. And the platform that we were using is what we built Cardjitsu Snow on. So there was also this, we need to make sure that Cardjitsu Snow is going to work on mobile as well when we launch it. Whereas before that, we didn't have mobile in the equation. So Cardjitsu Snow was kind of designed around, okay, what are we going to do for touch interfaces, right? And we wanted to do something different. So really, in terms of the game design there, that was a big one from Charlene. She did a bunch of work on that concept, and she was just like, hey, I don't want to do another game that's exactly like the other ones. I want to kind of throw the cards away a little bit and just have more of a story. So to me, Cardjitsu Snow is almost like a bit of a reset. And in between there, when you're talking about mobile, there's the like when we remade the world, that's the full Penguin experience that we launched on mobile. But before that, we were doing just sort of small standalone mobile games. I don't know if you remember the Puffle launch came on.
That. Was there a sled racing game developed for mobile?
Yeah, that one came later though. So that one was that was after, I think after Karjitsu Snow, when we just wanted to run a small Unity experiment. That was the
Mhm.
first time we did anything in Unity for it,
Okay.
because prior to that, we were doing Unity experiments. We didn't do anything for real until Sled Racer. Sled Racer was our proof of concept for Unity. But before that, we were doing more of the classic coded in Objective-C, like sit down and write your Latin to make this game work. So Puffle Launch was one of the first ones. And then the other one that we were working on was Karjitsu, but not Karjitsu Fire, not Karjitsu Snow, not Karjitsu anything, just Karjitsu on mobile. And so as part of that, and I can share with you, I think I might have the sneak peek video that we made for that. It just made like a little teaser video, and it was totally not released. We did a Happy 77 video. I don't know if you're familiar with Happy 77. Do you know?
Was she like the fan who ran a lot of things, or was she a staff member?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm thinking of Sarah April. So she was. I
Yeah.
remember her. She was a staff member. Happy.
Yeah. So Happy 77 was a former staff member, and for a long time we wrote as that penguin. So it became almost like a collective group voice rather than than her herself. And in fact, actually, it's funny because we asked her permission. Like one of the team members, like one of my team had asked her, hey, can I write as Happy 77s? You're not using the character anymore. So there's a whole story in there. And then we've got actually documentary footage of sitting down and interviewing Holly, is her name. And Holly was a mom. And it's like me and Johnny, Business Moose, sitting there and interviewing her about where she's at. And she's like, who's Happy 77 now? And then we just kind of pause and look at each other. She's like, it's you guys. And we got it on camera of her being like, you're Happy 77 now? What? But anyways, at the time we had picked Happy 77 as our kind of YouTuber because we were just experimenting. We wanted to put out some video content. So the beginning of us doing video content was right around the same time of doing the Karjitsu mobile game. And one of the things we did for Karjitsu mobile was just really simple. We made a shadow outfit. There was all this talk of like, oh, shadows and the shadow gem and da 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 da. There was all these rumors. In fact, you should definitely, have you talked to Ninja O'Dark?
I've not. You're the first Club Penguin person I've really spoken to in any capacity.
Right. Okay.
Besides loosely arranging something with cheap versus gravity.
Yeah. So you should definitely try and talk to the twins. So that would be, they're working on Box Critters right now. So that's Sir Pirate and I don't remember. It's like Captain Pirate and Sir Champion. I can't remember their penguin names, but they're some of the earliest artists. Like they joined early 2006, right? So they came on. I think they were recommended by Screenhog actually, so joined the team. And those guys are long, like they're such a core piece of Penguin. And so they worked on some concept. But you should talk to Ninja O'Dark, who's a fan. He made a bunch of apps himself, and he put them up in the App Store. And he had made his own character, Ninja O'Dark, and he made this like fake shadow dojo, and people were like, "That's real," and they all like it just picked up as like this is the real thing. And so he kind of grew in notoriety in the community because they're like, are you a staff member? It was kind of that thing, like, is this staff? And that was kind of that fueled a little bit of shadow talk with the community of like, oh, what's the shadow element? Da, da, da. Is there a shadow element? Da, 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 da. So at the time, we just basically all we had was a shadow ninja costume. It was just almost like a match of the water, fire, and snow outfits. We had the shadow ninja costume, which I'm sure you've seen because everybody's seen it by this point. And that was going to be mobile exclusive. So you would play the Karjitsu Classic on mobile, and you get to the end and you get the shadow ninja suit. So really, it's kind of, I think, almost for the best that didn't launch, because if you think about it, it's like a lot of people would have had the sort of the Herbert's Revenge reaction to be like, oh, I've already played this though, so I wanted new content. I was kind of hoping for a new game or a new experience, right? So we ended up shelving it because we were moving into like we just made a strategy change. We just decided it wasn't the way to go, which we always kind of had it in our heads that we wanted to reboot it at some point. And I think that was a piece of it, was the scope to draw it. We thought, let's do this 3D. And so we kind of put it on hold again, the Karjitsu on mobile. And we're like, hey, one day we'll do the mobile version. One day. And eventually, like Spike Hike and the team in LA started prototyping that. So I think he's shared like, here's a video clip of Cardjutsu 3D on mobile, right? And that would have been the reboot of Cardjutsu. Look, it's not 2D drawings, it's full 3D, right? Using the new model.
Was that intended to be what you guys were considering Cardjutsu Shadow?
No.
Oh, okay.
So that was just going to be like Cardjutsu Classic, okay. We would call it internally, Cardjutsu Classic. But we did also separately, a lot of the team, we had concepts for what is Cardjutsu Shadow, because we're like, it's way too cool to just throw it away on like, oh, it's just a mode or it's just an outfit. We're like, this is way too cool. Like, why are we wasting this? Like, why don't we make something cool out of this? It's like, it's the fourth gem. It's the middle of the amulet. Like, why would you not do something with this? So there are a lot of ideas thrown around. And I know that Russ, he's probably got some design docs for it. But there's two that really stand out to me as like the ones I remember, which is there was two concepts. One is taking the idea, because think about Cardjutsu Snow was a bit of a reboot, right? So there was like, you take the original Cardjutsu and he kind of rethought and reimagined the whole story, because now there's a new villain, there's all this new stuff that's happened. So in a way, it kind of almost resets the story and starts in a new phase. So we would have had to continue the Tusk story. It would have kind of had to lean into that. So one of the concepts that we had was a little bit like a Slay the Spire style game. I don't know if you're familiar with that game, but it's basically a head-to-head battler where you have, this is my character on the left and this is who I'm battling on the right, just like Cardjutsu. The difference is it's much more involved. It's in the board game world, they call it a deck builder. So it's a deck building game. You basically have a stack of cards that's yours, you shuffle that deck, and then you deal yourself 5 cards. And those are the actions you have as your available hand this turn. So you can do one of the actions in your hand only. So it's kind of like you have the agency of choice. You can choose what's in your hand, and that's it. So it gives you constraints, and you're trying to defeat the other player. So it's more hit points based. So you'd have like a little meter bar. It's like, okay, I did this many damage with this card. So it knocked their points back a bit. So that was one concept, was this kind of like deck builder battler. That was one of the ideas. And one day I want to do that. So I want to build all these ideas in the future, because really it's just, they're cool mechanics. If you ever play Slay the Spire, it's a great game. And then the other one was actually a totally different idea, which is actually more of a twin stick shooter style. So if you're familiar, it was actually what we were thinking was something a little bit like Pocky and Rocky, which is actually about to have a reboot coming up. There's a new Pocky and Rocky Reshrined coming out. And it's a shooting game, like a shmup, where you're basically moving your character and shooting forward, and then there's enemies coming to you. But the difference is you're a little character running around, right? So it takes place in sort of feudal Japan as this sort of like in almost like a Shinto world. And you're like throwing cards. You're like, I was like, this is perfect. Like that one out of all of them to me is the most exciting, because it's like a 2-player co-op head-to-head shooter where you're throwing cards in all the different directions and there's obstacles flying at you. Like that would be just super fun. It's kind of the idea that you're getting powers and you're playing your power cards, and then that becomes a bonus. So yeah, I still think one day I'd love to make games like that, those two games, but those are the ones that I remember. And I know that Russ has got a different one that they talked about internally as well. So that's why it's good to chat with different people to get different points of view, because working at Penguin was a little bit like it's a little bit like attending a music festival. If you go to Coachella and there's 5 different stages, you know, your experience of Coachella and my experience of Coachella are going to be different. I'm going to go see this MC, you're going to go see this DJ. Now I'm going to go see this band, and then you're going to go see this folk artist. So our mix of what we choose is actually kind of different. And with the team, because there were enough of us, we were working on different things at different times, right? So when I was working on all the community and social stuff, I wasn't necessarily working super closely with the parties team, for example.
Yeah, I've noticed that, because I've interviewed a lot of the creators of that specific Transformers show that I mentioned way earlier, Transformers Animated. When I interviewed the head writer, he remembered things differently than the art director, for instance. Like
Yep.
everyone's working in different departments, they have their own perspectives on how the story would have gone.
Yeah, and that's just naturally a consequence of any team that scales up. And that's why Lance and I are huge fans of small teams, because actually it's easier to keep things together. Like the bigger you go, the more you have this like people coming up with different things and they don't remember what each other said, and it just gets complicated. So over time, as Penguin wasn't going like up and it was starting to like slow, the growth was slowing, it was declining because of Flash and people were moving onto mobile, right? And playing Minecraft. It's like now suddenly Penguin has to compete with Minecraft. Good luck. Minecraft will probably go down in history as like one of the top, the most important and significant games of all time in terms of history. It's like right up there with Tetris. It is one of the most lean, mean game loops of all time. It's like create, destroy, create, destroy, create, destroy, and then craft, create, destroy, create, destroy. It is such a fast loop that you work through over and over and over again. Like there's nothing else like it. And it's just such an infinity system. It's really hard to compete with that, and at that time it was just capturing imaginations everywhere. So, I mean, at the time we just had too big a team at that point. And so that's where it's like, okay, we need to knock this back a bit and right size our team, bring it back, reduce the size of the team. And that's where the nice thing about Club Penguin Island is that team was a lot smaller. So they could work as an organized unit and they could really have each other's back. They could know what each of them is up to. Like in Transformers, like you got the Transformers team. If it's too big, then it's too hard for the art director to know what the writer is thinking and vice versa. It's actually usually hard to figure out what the writer is thinking because the writer thinks about everything in way greater detail than anybody else, and it's, you want to talk about headcanon. Writers are the headcanon people. They have all these ideas and they usually conflict with each other. So you put a couple of writers in a room, they have all this detail about what they think is going to happen and they're totally different from each other. So that's part of the tension of even if you have multiple writers, that's why you have writers' rooms, is because with a writing room, everybody's ideas get pulled into like the accepted canon. It's kind of actually the best structure for organizing something that's big, like say the Star Wars universe or the Marvel Cinematic Universe or DC. Any of these, you kind of need to bring all the separates back together so that you can at least be on the same page. But it's hard. It's not easy.
All right. And then just one last question about Shadow. Then we'll circle back to a handful of Snow questions that didn't get answered. Why did the team ultimately decide to not go in the direction of Karachitsu Shadow?
I don't think we really decided. I think we just had all these other things that we were doing, right? Like if you look back through the history of time, when did Snow come out? Snow came out 2013, yeah. And then, yeah, so I mean, it was it early 2013?
I was May of 2013.
Yeah, that's a long time. So in the 4 years in between, really they were focusing more on parties. Like that was a big factor, right? Like just seeing like I can sort of figure out, I'm just looking at the wiki.
It's so great that they have that because I would not remember all the dates.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super thankful that they all these fans basically like remembered all of history. Yeah, it's a hard one. I don't really recall why we moved on to other stuff. I mean, I know one of the factors might have been that people just wanted a lot of mission stuff, so it became a sort of which one does better. And because Operation Blackout combined the spy theme and questing with a parties were always the biggest drivers. They were the reason to come back. From a data perspective, like Karachitsu Snow wouldn't look as big on paper as Operation Blackout would have looked. So it probably was really down to just other priorities based on the data, actually. Like I don't remember a conscious conversation that said, let's not work on Shadow. I think it was more like a side of desk So those of us who are passionate enough about it would just work on ideas, we just explore them on the side. But they just never really bubbled up to being more important than the other stuff. Like Smoothie Smash was part of a sort of marketing partnership that we had with Innocent Smoothies in the UK. So there was kind of a reason for that game.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. We had done a party. It was just, it gave us something significant to add to the world after the party. So that's why I really liked it, is we did the Temple of Fruit event, and it was sort of like we could promote it on Innocent Smoothie packages in the UK, which is actually, it's a really big, notable brand in the UK. And they're a really cool brand as well. It's not some like lame brand where it's just a logo slap. It was like they actually believe in healthy eating, and their social media is really fun. Like Innocent is a great brand. And so the fact that we had an opportunity to work with them was like, we're going to put our effort to that. And it was a lot of work to just do that party in game. So basically the whole team was deployed just focusing on that one. Same thing, Frozen, like the Frozen party was huge from a numbers perspective.
Star Wars party.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, we needed those events to keep the lights on, actually. Like, clipping was kind of doing a bit of a decline-ish. And then when we brought in the Marvel party, it brought in fresh blood and was a boost. So those events were really helpful for us to bring in new audience who didn't know about Penguin before, right? So the Frozen event brought in a whole bunch of Frozen fans into learning about Penguin. The problem is that they loved Frozen. They showed up for the Frozen event and didn't necessarily stick around for the rest of Penguin. So I think there's a lot of people who kind of missed Penguin. They showed up and it kind of missed it. And I know in terms of launch dates, the work on Island started probably 2 years before it ever launched.
Project Super Secret is what they called it.
What's that?
They called it Project Super Secret for a long time.
Before. Yeah, well, I mean, Project Super Secret was actually originally Mix. So that's the spoiler alert. Is Mix was live for about 8 months, and it was basically like a social messaging platform, and that was actually originally Project Super Secret. But as time went on, it was like, I don't know if we're ready for Mix to launch yet. There's a lot of work to do on Mix, and it was like, okay, and we didn't even know what it was going to be called, the team that was working on that. So it's like, okay, well, why don't we just say Project Super Secret is actually the next version that's like Club Penguin 2. At the time, I think we called it like, I'm trying to remember what the internal language was. I think it was like Club Penguin Remix, I think was one of the names. Yeah, it was basically like a sequel to Penguin, and it was starting fresh. It was like, hey, let's not be tied to the legacy of the past. Let's go brand new, design for, we think everyone's going to mobile, so let's design for mobile only. It's going to be a mobile experience, and we're really going to optimize for that. We're going to make the best possible mobile experience. At least that was the approach, right? So yeah, but we know how that kind of panned out. It didn't go as well.
No.
Well, I think a big part of it was just that we had shut down, like I wasn't there at the time, right? So because the world had been shut down, and that's what everybody had the nostalgia for, I wouldn't have launched them together. I would have let there been some time with nothing, and I think they were afraid of doing that or something. They were like, we need to make sure that we get that audience that's excited about it. Who knows what their strategy was internally, but I don't think it panned out for them.
Because it just came across as a replacement that was like full of microtransactions. I remember people were just like go on there and like big armies to just like troll, and then they'd all get like kicked on YouTube.
Yeah. And it's really, really sad. And I think unfortunately, people weren't always the nicest. They would go and they would harass team members because they didn't like it. And that's where, to me, I draw issue is like, you shouldn't be harassing, say, Meg, just because you don't like the way this world is going, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, community managers often bear the brunt of like I would experience this. People are like, why are you doing this, Paul? This is the stupidest thing ever. Like, literally not my decision, but I'm sorry, I totally get you. And I agree with you. I'll tell the team. You'd have to just hope that we make the change. Like an example of that would be pins. For some reason, the team at some point was like, oh no, the stats, not enough people are discovering the weekly hidden pin. Let's make the pins big enough that they can find them. Well, then they were like, double the size of the penguin, this giant face with a white outline, and it's just like, here's the pin. It's like just impossible to miss, right? And so it kind of destroyed the fun of pins for a lot of players, because they're like, I liked that they were kind of hidden. It was like a Where's Waldo game. It was like, or Where's Wally if you're in the UK. It's like, where's the pin? I don't know. Do you know where the pin is? And then people would tell each other where the pin was, and it was really cool. But when we made them gigantic, it kind of killed the discovery factor. But that would be something that a community manager would get like just totally hammered about. Like, what are you doing? This is terrible. This is the worst idea ever. And they'd be like, sorry you feel that way. We'll do our best. And then we'd relay the information on, and then hope the development team would actually make the change. So
how many of the changes that happened later in the game were because Lance, Lane, and Dave had all left? Do you think things would have shaken out differently had they stayed with the company?
I don't know. Playing if games is always hard. Like, I'm kind of like, it's like it's like with Doctor Strange, when you just kind of go, well, what if you did it this way? I'm like, oh. Like, I think it was just, I believe in fate. I just believe it was going to go the way it was going to go regardless, unfortunately. I remember talking to one of the engineers, and he was really excited about Island. He was like, oh, we finally get to do what we want to do. I was like, oh, okay. I was taken aback when he said that. I was like, oh, okay, you haven't been doing what you wanted to do for these years. Okay, interesting. Can't wait to see what you come up with, right? So I don't know. It's hard to say, really, like with the dynamics of the team. I think it was probably a really great change at the time. It was just like, fresh blood when you move things around. Like, every company at its different life cycles needs different leadership and tactics, right? So my time, I was burnt out. I was so burnt out by the end. Like, that's when it's just like the last 2 years, I was just running on fumes. And so I think some of the people were burnt out, it's just like, not going to do your best creative work there. I think we probably would have shaken out regardless. Maybe the product would have changed a little bit, but I don't know. It's still ultimately the team. Like, and it's, people blame, they're like, it was some force, it was Disney. It's like, well, yeah, maybe, but it was still a lot of us. It was still a lot of my peers in town here who worked on that product. So I don't know that it entirely would have been different. Like, I know that there was even hesitation with some of the crews, like, I don't know if this is going to work. And I like Spike Hike had his concerns. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of concerned. I'll support you, but like, is this going to work? There's a lot of uncertainty when you do something new. So, and I know that team wanted to do new. That was part of the tension, I think, with the community. It was a bit like, I'll compare it to Ghostbusters 3, or like whatever you want to call it. What's the name for it now?
The 2016 one?
It's the one that was written by a different crew with I'm trying to remember the cast. Melissa McCarthy.
Oh yeah, it was just called Ghostbusters, but it's technically Ghostbusters 3.
Yeah, and the fandom completely rejected Ghostbusters. And I know, because I personally was one of them. I watched it, I was like, this is not my Ghostbusters. I was just so upset. I was like, this is not Ghostbusters. And I was really excited about it. I couldn't wait for the idea of like an all-female Ghostbusters cast. I was like, this is going to be awesome. And then it was just I don't know what it was. It was just so dialogue heavy. Like, they took forever with all this exposition that wasn't funny. But it was trying to be different and new. It was trying to not be Ghostbusters. Like, it was trying to be its own thing. And that was part of the tension, is like, Island felt like it was trying to do its own thing. It wasn't actually the Penguin universe. It was, but it wasn't. And I think when the audience and the community talks about it, they acknowledge that near the end, it started to feel more like Penguin. I think that was a conscious effort. I know the twins fought really hard to bring in things that were familiar from the classic Penguin world and love, right? And so they started bringing in a lot more of those ingredients, and suddenly there was like a pickup of like, okay, yeah, this is starting to get good. And then it was like, okay, well, it's too late, because it's just, it's burning money. In the startup world, you have to think about what's the burn rate, right? Like, you've got this much you spend each month, and you got this much you make in that profit and loss statement. If it doesn't equate, if the math doesn't work, you got to shut it down. Like, there's just no, it's just not, when you're running a business, especially a big company, and you have like a garage full of Lamborghinis, like the Marvel universe, like Star Wars, like it starts to look like a beat up junker if it's not making any money, right?
Mhm.
So the expectations are too high. It just was it was its time, you know.
Well, I'm still glad that I was able to play it from pretty much the beginning because it from some of my absolute fondest childhood memories are in the first like 5 years, 6 years of Club Penguin. Like I remember my sister was playing it because she saw ads on the Disney Channel or something. And like I introduced it to my elementary school through one of my friends, and
Awesome.
I just it's I see old like clips of the penguins walking around and I smile a lot. And I just want to thank you for the role you played in that throughout my early childhood.
Oh, you're welcome. It's completely our privilege and honor, and I mean that with 100% sincerity. What's your favorite memory?
Oh, Blackout by far. I made a video about that.
Okay. Okay.
Being,
What about you remove Blackout from the equation?
okay. All of the spy stuff. I absolutely love the spy stuff. I wanted a new mission every week. And then there'd be like 2 weeks without a new spy phone call, and I'd be like, "Where are they? What are they doing? They gave up on missions." I absolutely adored that. And then I would just remember, like, I pretty much every party in that first and then like in that 5 year span I attended. I remember looking at like the yearbooks on the library shelf, and there was like a few I remember missing, but I attended just about everything, and I loved it so much.
That's awesome. Did you read the newspaper?
Yeah, I did read the newspaper. According to I think Lane, that was read more often than the New York Times.
Yep. Yep. It was very, very popular because it was the place to go to read things that were new. And we liked, again, irony, right? Like we liked that it was this digital world and you go in there and you're like, time to read the newspaper. It's just such irony to be like, paper? News? Who reads newspapers now? You think about technology and where we're at. It was this great irony to have a digital newspaper format, especially at the beginning. It was like the first few issues are black and white, even all the illustrations are black and white. So yeah, I mean, the newspaper is just fun. It became actually one of the only real story vehicles that we had. Like if you remove the newspaper and missions, it was actually really hard to tell a story in Penguin because we had the constraint of we always wanted players like you to be the star, right? So we didn't want to make Rockhopper, Gary, Herbert, Klutzy. We didn't want to make them the stars. We always tried to keep them secondary. They were supporting characters. And that's really hard if you have a non-linear storytelling platform and the lead character could be any player. How do you tell a story with that? That is much harder than it's actually almost impossible to tell a real decent story. You kind of need to get to some sort of linear format. That's why the PSA missions were great and the newspaper is great because they're linear. So here's the thing.
In the PSA missions, like your little penguin flipper would always be the color of your penguin, and that made it feel like it was you. And then also they had like a series of choose your own adventure books where you would read as you, like you go to the forest, down the path or whatever.
Oh, are you talking about in the book room?
No. It was like physical releases. They released like a whole series of choose your own adventure.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, those are awesome.
Oh, but there was also like those, like you type in the book that they had in the book room. I think they got rid of those later, but it was like lime green dojo clean. Let's type a story about what you do in the dojo that day.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I wrote those.
Oh, you wrote those?
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't put them in later because of localization, because every single letter was coded by hand. So the way it was built was going to be a complete nightmare. And then in terms of how many people played it, it just wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it for us to rebuild it. There just wasn't enough players playing it. This is why I always caution every product team that I work with is to be like, don't just focus on data. Like, don't just focus on numbers because you miss the love. Like you have to have qualitative data and quantitative data, right? So the quantitative is like, oh, how many people played Operation Blackout? How many people earned their black belt in Karjitsu, right? That'll tell you how many people did it, but it won't necessarily tell you why. It won't tell you like what they love of it and what they wish there was more of. It won't give you that sort of that humanity, so you need that qualitative data to actually hear from people and go, that's fun. I love this. Hey, nice puffle, Stinky Pants 423 or whatever. Right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Anyways.
I was going to ask, I was gonna ask, what is your like party parrot thing that you've been doing with Business Moose? Because I've seen that on your Twitter. I'm not really sure what that is.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll talk about it. So we just said, okay, you know what, wouldn't it be cool if we just for a joke, people would ask me questions. They'd be like, hey, can you tell me about this character from Penguin? I was like, well, it's kind of insider baseball, but I can give you an example. And you're like, hey, it's like, what's Rookie like? I was like, well, I can't really tell you what Rookie's like, but I could tell you what Pookie's like. And I make like sort of a fictional parody of that character just to give you an example of how we would think when it comes to character development. So that was kind of what I started. I started as a joke. So years ago, I bought clubpartyparrot.com. And I was like, this is kind of a funny joke. I'll just buy it. And so I started as a joke. I was like, ah. And then when I reached like on the Red Keytar account, like I used to tweet about Penguin stuff occasionally on my personal Twitter account because I knew I had Penguin followers and they would ask me questions. The problem is my non-Penguin followers are like, why are you talking to me? What about Penguin? This is weird. So I was like, you know what? It's just easier to have a specific account for it. So I started the Red Keytar account. And so years later, I was like, well, the fun thing about like Party Parrot is I could literally draw it myself. And that's what I did. You look on clubpartyparrot.com, you see seed hog. I drew that poorly, intentionally. like, yeah, here you go. And it's a mashup of, are you familiar with the Party Parrot meme?
I'm not actually.
Oh, okay. If you go to cultofthepartyparrot.com, you'll find like all these animated GIFs. So in between my time of leaving Penguin to now, I have consulted for a bunch of different companies. I've designed products that have been used by millions of people. And a lot of the different companies would have Party Parrot installed on their Slack instance, or I'd see it pop up in Discord. And it's this meme from a Stephen Fry nature video where this parrot, who's actually really endangered, there's 200 of them, spoiler alert, 200 of them in the world. They're highly endangered. It's a flightless, gigantic, fat parrot, like this big, massive turkey of a parrot. And it's so big that it can't fly. And it's nocturnal. So it's this bizarre, like they call it a night parrot or an owl parrot. And there's only 200 in existence. And this parrot, because they're so endangered, they need to breed, right? And so this parrot starts trying to breed with the guy's head. And so it went viral. And then somebody made an animated version of the parrot doing this like he's doing this thing with his head. And so it looked like he's kind of doing a dance. And so they made this sort of dance. And then they just turned it into a meme. And they had all these different versions of this like parrot turning all these different colors and dancing like da, 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 da. And I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. I'd be in all these serious Slacks talking about business stuff and people would be reacting with this party parrot emote. And I was like, this is really funny. Maybe I'll just mash up the two worlds. I'll make like Party Parrot, Club Party Parrot. It's like, it's a parody of a parody, of Club Penguin. And that was the joke. And then once I kind of reached a certain threshold of followers, I was like, I don't feel like I'm that interesting personally. Like, I don't think I'm that interesting. So I just wanted to do something nice for the community. I'm always trying to like go, what can I do that's nice that, raises up these amazingly talented people there were these kids who had dreams of working on Club Penguin. We'd have kids writing to me all the time saying, I want to work at Club Penguin one day. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to write stories. I want to make games. And there was this dream. And so for me, it was sad when the world got shut down. I was like, you know what? I want that dream to come to reality. Wouldn't it be cool if I hired some of the most amazing fan artists that always sent me fan art back in like 2010 or whatever? I was like, why don't I just bring them on and we'll make something new together? And so originally I'd put out this commission thing and I just said, look, I will happily just draw your outfit for you. I'll draw a Party Parrot avatar just for you, just as a thank you for following me on Twitter, because I don't think I'm that interesting. So I am happy to do that as a gift to you. And originally I was going to do it myself. But I was like, you know what? It'd be more fun if we did this as like, almost like it is kind of like draws from that original old school Penguin vibe of like it's 2D art. It kind of looks like Flash, and there was something fun to the paper doll. We called it the paper doll. The Penguin paper doll was this 2-dimensional cutout and you could dress it up. Well, Party Parrot, we're doing the same kind of thing where it's like it's a 2-dimensional thing and people are like, hey, this is the item I want. And of course, a lot of people want something that reminds them of their themselves in Penguin, like playing Penguin. So I was like, well, we can do something that's new and original that has some familiar, comfy vibes of the original. And we'll just make it a real world. As a Lance, can we just make this a world just for fun? Like, why not? We'll support the community. I'll hire fan artists and we'll build it for real. So that's what we're doing. We're actually building, I don't know if we're going to call it Club Party Parrot. Who knows what we'll call it, but we're just building the world, and it's slowly emerged to go this way. And it just so happened that separately, Johnny started working with Lance on a different project. And so we just accidentally ended up reunited. It was not intentional at all. And it was like, okay, well, I can help Johnny with his project. And also I can do, like, we could do this world thing. So it kind of just became this, like, the right idea at the right time, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? So yeah, what we're doing is we're designing for mobile first. And so we're prototyping right now, Unity, so 3D. So we're actually taking the 2D rooms that we're concepting as we go with these amazing artists from the community that we've brought in as the team. And we're just, Johnny and I were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we just did a community show where we just talk about communities and storytelling and all the rest of it? And we're like, well, I don't really know what it is. Wouldn't it be more fun if we just imagine the dream of, like, if you could have been there when Lance was making Penguin. Imagine if there was like a weekly, like, hey, here's what we did this week, and you're kind of just part of it. That's what we're trying to do, is like, imagine the dream of, like, you're there, you're watching as we're making this, and you can be part of it unfolding, and you're a big important part of it. And that's what we're doing with Parrot. So we're building these worlds. We have the moose as well. So there's all these moose requests that we're taking, and we're turning those into outfits, right? So yeah, it's kind of fun because it's community driven development. It's not like, oh, here's the thing we want to do. It's like, there's a little bit of what we want to do, but it's mostly like the majority, like 90%. What does the community want? And then the cool thing is there's all these dreams. So if you ever have any dream, I don't know, have you requested an outfit yet?
I didn't really know what it was until
I'll send you the moose request. I'll send you that. I don't know if you're in the Discord, but you're totally welcome to join us. And I'll add you to the hype club. We've got a role that's like when someone goes live or whatever, we've got a special group. I can just put you in there. And then, yeah, like we just basically just have a little community, and we're just going, hey, here's an idea that we got. Hey, here's this. And it's just the making of Penguin, but more transparent. We're trying to actually do it the way that we think is fun, which is, hey, we're not necessarily the most entertaining dads in the world, but hey, well, we can show up and be like, hey, here's the awesome stuff the community did. So we just show off whatever community work is happening. If people are designing stuff in 3D, they're doing 3D models, like all these talented people that are learning to be creatives, right? That are learning to be professional writers, learning to be professional artists, graphic designers. And we're just featuring their work each week, mixed with the development of Party Parrot and Moose in Suits. So there's also the Moose world. So
2 worlds.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're building it from a common platform. We're going to probably start with Parrot first, and then we'll build Moose on top of that. So yeah, so two separate worlds and separate lores and all the rest of it, but there's this nice yin and yang. So we've got the clothing items, and each clothing item has an icon, and we're going to probably use those icons as the pins in the Moose world, and then the icons from the outfits in the Moose world we'll use as pins in the Parrot world. So there's this kind of nice like reference to each other. Like that's kind of what we want to do. Is it's kind of, in a way, I'm calling it the snail verse. Like what I want to do is kind of bring the ideas of all the rocket snail ideas into like this soup of different comics. It's kind of like having Conan the Barbarian over here, and I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy over there, and Avengers over there. That's kind of what we're doing. So, and then, super fun.
How old is the player base for Party Parrot? Or I guess the people you have, do you think they're generally like my age, people who grew up with Club Penguin?
Yep. Okay. Well, that's not going to be the player base later. So what we're doing is we're designing something. What's cool is because of that constraint of an older sort of university audience or late high school, right? That's where the age is kind of in there. Now that's the base that remembers Penguin, that's the starting foundation. So that's an audience. And then what we're doing is we're all designing it for our 10-year-old selves. Like, just unleash your inner 10-year-old. So when we're having conversations like, what would your 10-year-old self love? And it's cool because it doesn't matter that I'm like, this old man, and other folks are in their early 20s. It really doesn't matter, because our common ground is what's fun when you're a kid. So it's nice because we can kind of meet in the middle to make this thing for our 10-year-old selves. And it's like, okay, we can tap into what did we love the most when Penguin was running, right? How do we make something that celebrates the fun that we had when we were playing, right? And it's fun. I can talk to the artists and be like, hey, what do you remember most? And like, oh, this was so dumb. I remember this thing. And everyone's experience is totally different when they played. Again, it's like Coachella. Everyone has a different memory of playing Penguin or making Penguin. It is just such a big product that, yeah, that's what makes it interesting to me. So,
all right. Anyways. And then also, you said Business Moose was working with Lance. That was called Box Critters, right?
No, so we're not working on Box Critters. That's a Hyper Hippo project. Oh, okay. So yeah, so Johnny and I are working with the Polo and Moose stuff. We're working on with Rocket Snail Games, which is a separate company from Hyper Hippo.
Oh, okay.
Right. So Rocket Snail owns a piece of Rocket Snail Games owns a piece of Hyper Hippo. Right. So they're separate companies, separate teams, separate budgets, separate incomes, all the rest of it. And right now, Box Critters, what they're working on over there, that's like a 2.5D world, right? All flat assets, and the flat assets are moving to and from the camera, right? And so that team, it's a completely separate team. And the only crossover is the community, really. And the fact that there's we try and help where we can, right? So as an example, I'm going to put together some guidelines to try and help the team a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that experiment, it's still an experiment. It's basically, think of Box Critters as experimental penguins, really, in terms of its feature set. There's not a lot you can do, just like experimental penguins. When it was out in 2001, all you could do was walk around and chat. That is it. Even the rooms were just white. There was just a white snow background, maybe a vehicle. That was it. So that's kind of like Box Critters is almost like an advanced version of experimental penguins in terms of its current maturity, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Moose is working on separate stuff, but the three of us are all in the Rocket Snail space. So it's just that Lance kind of juggles his time. He's sort of developing it under Rocket Snail, but that development time is being funded by Hyper Hippo. So ultimately, Adventure Capitalist and Adventure Communist and Adventure Ages fund the development of Box Critters.
Okay.
Right. Whereas what we're doing with this is we're actually building a new company, and that is going to be focused on children's entertainment. That's really going to be our focus. Whereas arguably that's not as much the Hyper Hippo focus. Those guys are really dedicated to idle games in the mobile space. Very different audience.
All right, cool. I've been wondering about that as I've been seeing them. All right, so that's in terms of Club Penguin questions and Card Jitsu questions. I think that's really all I had to ask of you. Cool. So, thank you very much for spending your time and doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for asking me. It was nice to chat with you. And I love talking to people who played, because it's way more interesting than just talking about Penguin. It's way more interesting to talk about people playing it. That's what I find the most interesting, is because, to be honest, players like yourself, Penguin better than most of the team did. That's just the reality, right? And so that's what I love about Party Parrot is I'm working with folks that know Penguin because they lived it, they breathed it. They didn't just work on it, they lived in it. That's very different,
It's true, because I guess a development team is only working on stuff in their specific department. So the party team probably wouldn't have seen the video shorts, like Herbert's Puffle Trouble video. They wouldn't have seen that, whereas the players were consuming everything as it came out.
Yeah. We would have these sort of team meetings and be like, here's what we did. And we would cross team show each other stuff. Yeah, it gets messy when you have big teams. That's the thing. You just can't really see everything, right? So we would start doing dailies, all kinds of stuff that we tried to try and share material across teams. But yeah, the stuff that Moose and I would do, we often wouldn't show any teams. We'd just be like, here's a video, blah, blah, blah. I approve it. Good, live. We just push it live. And that was it. And so, at the beginning, it was that, I think, lent to a certain sense of internal excitement, because we would do something like Herbert style, or we'd be like, Lane, hey, can we put you in chainmail and have you run around as a knight? And be like, sure, awesome. And then we go film him, and people are like, what is going on? Why are they running around with a camera? And why is Billy Bob wearing a knight costume? Why is he running across the bridge with a sword? What is happening? And then they wouldn't see until the result. And then basically the community and the team would pretty much see at the same time. So that was pretty fun, actually. Yeah.
So I was like,
Nice.
okay, I want to do another one. So I decided to do one about the ninja experience that
Okay.
Club Penguin had. And so I did a long interview with Chris Gliddon about kind of just like the long-term development of all the 5 games. And so I think our interview will probably be a lot more specific, kind of just about the development side of it, because that my understanding is that's what you worked on.
Yes, I was on the games team. I started with missions and then worked my way into, working on, I co-created Karjutsu Fire, created Karjutsu Water. We had Snow created, and then we had the next game created as well, sort of well fleshed out, but not actually created. So,
So yeah, that's what I'd like to talk about. Actually, maybe at the end we could talk about the missions. I didn't realize you worked on those. I loved those so much as a kid.
yeah, I came in later on them, so I was quite lucky to be able to do that. So you can see me video-wise, right?
Oh no, actually, I can just see your little icon, the amulet. I can't
Yeah.
see your face.
I should probably set it up so that you can actually see my face. Huh?
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were going to do that or not.
Minus. Now I'm a Zoom noob, so
Okay.
I'm like, how do I set that up here?
So in the bottom
start
left.
video. I got it. There we
Cool.
go.
All right. Hi there.
Hi again. Now let
Okay.
me make you larger and me smaller, and everything is fine. So there we go.
Right.
Hello. I look like this.
Hello there.
Gray-haired, and that's how it goes. It's been fun actually watching people like yourself, where you meet them as kids when they're young and playing your game, and then you get older and you age up, and so do they. And the first few times that some of our super fans are like, yeah, I just finished my my entrance exams for college, you're like, boom, just blows your mind entirely, sort of thing.
I'm about to graduate in a few months.
Nice. That's
So,
cool.
I know.
I'm always so honored to have been a part of something that has such a legacy and just impacted so many kids, and they enjoyed it. I think of it as sort of the equivalent to Saturday morning cartoons. When I grew up, that was the thing that it's like, oh, Saturday morning cartoons. And Penguin, I think, was that thing you look forward to after school. It was like those after school cartoons,
Yeah,
except it was
exactly.
real. So,
All right.
let me adjust this. There we go. Adjusting. I'm going with soft center. Yeah, there you go.
All
Cool.
right. So I guess I'll go ahead and start by asking, how did you become involved in Club Penguin?
So I was working for another company, a company called Bridges.com. Actually, it was back in the .com era, back in the beginning of the internet, when it was still run by coal and steam. And we did career counseling information for kids, like tens of thousands of schools around North America. And I've always loved games and that small place where computers and people meet, because it doesn't matter how amazing your computer is and how fast it is, it's where the people actually, it's that the user interface, that part where they come together, and that's where the magic happens. It's sort of like the steering wheel of a car. You have an amazing engine, you can have, you need to have all the things wrapped around it. What's important is the steering, how it feels, and how the user can understand what to do, sort of thing. So I was doing that and website design all around sort of career counseling. And I had an opportunity to apply for a job at Club Penguin. And I'm a Disney fan. I've always loved Disney, and old Disney, as it were. And I had a chance to apply, and I got in. and they were looking for either someone to work on the back end, someone to work on the games team, sort of thing. And I've been a gamer since, oh Lord, since the horrible, the initial consoles like Pong, Atari 2600. I mean, I remember delivering papers for 6 months to get $50 to buy my first Atari cartridge, sort of thing. So I've been gaming forever. But because of my interest in how things were made and how people use them, when I played the game, I was always going, this works, this doesn't work. You know, how could this be? Why is this fun? So I'm naturally curious. So take all those things together, and I'm sitting in the interview and talking to Troy, and I think it was Dustin was on the server side, and Troy was on the games team. He was the manager of the games team. And we were having a discussion back and forth, and it was very clear that I would not be a good fit for the technical team because I'm not an engineer. I'm a programmer, but I'm not a deep engineer, sort of thing. And Troy and I just sort of hit it off, and he gave me a chance, put me on the missions team, and I started making puzzles for them. So I did some of the puzzles, like the one where you have to put the water back and forth, the pink fluid. That was me.
Oh, the jetpack. Okay.
Yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep, that was my puzzle. That was my first puzzle, actually, ever.
That was too hard. I couldn't figure that one out.
Yes. we actually, it's funny, we made it and then we tested it, and none of our kid testers could get it. It was too hard. So that's why on the sand there was that little scroll we put down there, just in case you didn't get it. You could click on it and it showed you the sequence, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm glad to hear that. Yes, nobody got it. So you have to make a lot of games wrong before you make them right, and that was good. So what else I did? I did the gear puzzle when you were reassembling. It was the soldering puzzle when you're reassembling the magnet. Yeah, all those kind of ones. So
all those were from the 10th mission, I remember.
I think so, yes. Yeah. That was right. That was my time when I sort of came around. So that was that. I mean, a long story long. That's how I came into being. I had an interview with them. They were a great team, and I'm like really wanted to work there. And they took a chance on me and hired me. That was my first game programming design job, and since then I've done nothing but, as it were. So, and I love it. I still do it today with the company I'm working with, and it's so much fun. So,
right. And then how did you make the jump from missions to the Ninja games?
So there was a small games team, and the missions team was part of that games team, as it were, if I recall. But basically there was a small crew. There was like Troy, myself, there was another artist, and then we would use the services of the writers to do the missions, sort of thing. And we got to a point where we had lots of missions and they were looking for more games. And I was working with Troy. We were working on the original, some of the original Cardjitsu stuff. And then we needed to come up with another game. And so we were like, okay, let's do some games, one on sort of each element. And then, so I just started, Troy and I, he had some games. Well, I was trying to remember what it was. There was an old Star Wars game that Cardjitsu Fire is loosely based on. It was inspired by. We didn't steal it, just inspired by. And from that, we worked out, just the game rules and how to present them and the programming and everything. Everything we did was about how do we take the things you had bought from Club Penguin, invested in, and make them valuable online and offline. So if you earned your some things in Cardjitsu, now you had more cards there, but what could you do with your offline cards in the real world? And that was everything we created. Like Cardjitsu Fire was actually a board game as well. And we created it actually, hold on here. So Cardjitsu Fire. Oh, yeah. So got an unopened package of Cardjitsu cards. I don't think it'll work anymore, but a few other things here. So anyhow, what is here? We had, so when we were developing these, I don't know if I've gone off down a side street here, but we were developing the games. We made them in real life first, and you play them in real life because you can you can tell whether the game is fun, and you can make changes really fast. If you go to code right away, you don't know what you're coding before you start coding. So first make the game in real life, make it fun, and then commit it to code. So we had, when you were battling Sensei in the games, we're like, how the heck do you make that happen? So I came up with this little thing here, which is, it's literally an envelope of poker chips, but there was an element on each one. And so you would take all these poker chips, they're all, of course, they're all water now, and you would shuffle them, place them upside down, and then when Sensei was going to play a card, you would just draw one of these, and it's like, oh, okay, Sensei played the water, he played this. So this was what we used as sort of the fake AI when we were building these games, sort of thing. That was one thing. What else was there? This is all, I mean, these are just like simple gold coins, but when you were playing the fire game, this was your energy sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that's sort of how the game went. It's like, okay, you got this many coins, and when you lost, we took one of your energies away. We had a little spinner, I think, or we were using dice to figure out which way you would move. But it was going to be an actual board game as well. And I think the thought was we would have all the board games connect together. So you would have your fire arena, and when we got water out, that would just sort of slot into the other one, and now your board game would be twice as big. And then originally you'd have or at the end, you'd have a 2x2 sort of grid of all different types of cardjutsu sort of thing. So.
Mm-hmm. But then they didn't wind up like releasing anything physically for those games.
No, we did a lot of work on that. And originally all the cardjutsu games, Water, Fire, and Snow, were all card-based. So cardjutsu, and I just happen to have still the one here. So cardjutsu Water, which was just cardjutsu cards, but this was sort of a tuned deck of cards for the water game. It was more like, are you familiar with the game Triple Triad?
I'm not, no.
It's from some of the Final Fantasy games. There was one of the writer / game designer, Cody, that we worked with. He loved that game. I think obsessed might be a better word with it. And so we had a game that was very different. You played it on I think it was a 3x4 grid of cards. And the cards you put down would would battle the cards beside it, like the 4 compass points. And there was this other mechanic where when you beat a card, it would then challenge the next card next to it. So you had this sort of, you could get this like flood of battles happening, which went with water sort of thing. And we had all these worked out, and then Snow had its own sort of mechanic, and it was a card game as well. And then at one point after we'd finished Fire, the sort of the management team was like, nope, it can't be, actually I think it was Lane actually, is like, it can't be a card game, it has to be a real-time game. And we're like, we had all these plans, and it's like, nope, it can't be that. And so, but we're like, it was going to be a board game too. Like, it's like, nope, it's got to be a real-time game. And so we didn't know what to do for, gosh, about a week or a few days. And then I took a deck of cardjutsu cards, and I went and I sat out in the lunchroom area, and I just started coming up with ideas. And it took me about an hour to come up with a cardjutsu water game and the mechanic behind it. And then we had some amazing engineers that made a real-time game multiplayer on what is essentially a text engine, like for chatting sort of thing. So that was amazing. So, and yeah, I'm rambling.
No, and I can kind of see elements of, you said like the card you play affects the cards next to it. That kind of carried over, I guess, into water, because if you put a card down, it could affect the two on either side in front of you.
Yeah. It was interesting. So, but everything was planned. Card-based, and then you could take your figurines you bought and use them on the board game, and then each board game you bought would make your sort of set much more impressive and much more fun to play, sort of thing. So.
And then, were you still working by the time of Card-Jitsu Snow? Because that was 3 years later.
No, I had left. Oh, sorry. I should say, so we had finished Card-Jitsu Water, and it was fairly successful. And then we were working on Snow, and we had a very different game. It was no longer card, it was going to be real time. And the Snow game that we designed was you would get up to four ninjas on a snowball, like a big snowball, imagine that. And this snowball would start rolling down the hill, and all four of your characters would have to run, basically. And they needed to run, so the direction of the snowball would move in was sort of the average of where everybody's running. So if you were running left and I was running right, the average would be straight down the track. So what we had is this thing going down a track, and if you want to go around it, all of your characters had to work together to steer the snowball as it was hurtling down the track. And you would go over jumps, you pick up bonus things. The twins, Chris, the pirate, I was trying to remember their names, not their actual names. The twins, the twins.
Chris mentioned the twins, and then he also didn't say their names, so I just know they're twins.
Yeah, Chris, Penguin. Yeah, Chris and Gord. They did most of the artwork for the early, like sort of mid Club Penguin, and they're just amazing. They were, in some ways, they're the heart of Club Penguin. It's sort of its mid range, as it were. So. Yeah, they're semi-identical twins, and yeah, they're just great guys. They're awesome to work with. So, and they were working on the art for Card-Jitsu Snow, and we had a big dojo that was sitting up on the top of a peak, and you would stand in line like you do for sled racing, sort of thing, and then it had these great big gates that would open, and snowballs would kind of roll out. And then everybody would hop on, and then they would just zoom off down the hill. So we had a lot of artwork done, and a lot of the game fleshed out. And we had been testing it with kids. And again, sort of the manager came to us and said, "No, that's not what we want. We want something different," sort of thing. And we went through a bunch of different revisions on Snow, and it was kind of a tough time, because on the games team, we thought nothing but games. And on sort of that current management team at the time, they weren't gamers. They didn't play games. So you couldn't go to them and say, we want to do a game like this game, not like a Nintendo game, but it's like Nintendo's doing this game and it was really successful. And, you would explain this sort of game to them, and they'd all kind of look at you like, and you're like, okay. So, and then you try another thing. So it was a little hard to talk to them, sort of thing, because you would have all these game ideas and they had none of this. So we didn't always connect, sort of thing. Because so
that was after Lance and Dave left, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there was only Lane was left at that time. So what was nice about the three of them is they were sort of like three legs of a stool, I think. So Lance was games and sort of being really creative. And this is, again, these are just my opinion, sort of thing. Dave was all business. He set up the business. And Lane was the salesman. Like Lane can sell like ice cream to, people living in the North. And ice cube makers. He's really good at doing that sort of thing. When Dave left, that was fine, because you still had these sort of two legs of the stool and it can still kind of stand. When Lance left, there was really no one championing games anymore. And it was just a little difficult. It was a difficult time. So we, I think, reworked Snow, I don't know how many times. And I got to the point where I'm just like, I'm never going to ship a game here anymore. It was not possible, because it just was not. It was not a game friendly environment, sort of thing. No, nothing. It was still, Club Penguin was still going along really well, but it was hard to innovate. And when you do something for a long time, early Club Penguin was like the Penguins would do anything. It didn't matter. It was just freedom. It's like you had a cool game idea, we'll work it in and the Penguins will do it. As you went along, you began to get a Penguin brand. And now it was more difficult because it's like, was it Puffle Cannon?
Puffle Launch.
Puffle Launch, that's it. I'm trying to remember what the actual end name was. I think we called it Puffle Cannon internally for a while. We had this boss that you were going to hit, and he was called Scowly.
The owl.
The owl. He was this big owl sort of thing, and we had him animated, and he was amazing sort of thing. And we couldn't put him out, and we're like, well, why not? It's like, well, you can't just introduce a new character to the island. We're like, that happens all the time. It's like, no, you gotta have a myth behind him. You gotta have, you gotta think about marketing. Will it appeal to all the audience? All these things, and you're like, oh, okay. And so we couldn't do that. So it became Krusty in that sort of floating machine that he does. So between these two things, it being no one sort of speaking for games at the top, and just internally, you just start editing yourself. You just start saying, no, it can't be that. It has to be this specific thing. It just got really hard to make things. So I left not too long after that. So I left a little bit before the Snow that launched before.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you have any thoughts on how the final product of Snow came out?
I played it a couple times. I played it a few times, and I think it was an interesting take. But it was really hard to coordinate what you were supposed to be doing with your other team members. And I think that was sort of its difficulty. The other thing was when we were designing games for 11, 12-year-olds, like older sort of games, whereas the target market was a lot younger. And so I think both Water may have been a bit complicated just from a hand-eye coordination. I would certainly do things differently if I had to now. And I think Snow was a bit that way as well. So I'm not, again, I don't know what they went through to actually get that game out onto market, because the game you want to make and the game that's released are often very, very different because of constraints that nobody sees. So, we have these great game ideas and we had board games all set, but they never went to market for various reasons. You're like, oh, that's just crushing sort of thing. But that's the reality of getting a game out to market. So.
Yeah, because I remember as a younger kid playing Snow. I think I would have been 12 at the time. No one would play it right. So if you were the Snow Ninja, your job was to heal the other ninjas, but no, they weren't healing at all, and so we'd all just die immediately.
Yeah,
I remember that. Everyone was
it was a game about teamwork, but you didn't know what you were supposed to do, and there was no. You didn't either know or you didn't care, sort of thing. And that's the difficulty when you rely on the experience, when you depend on your other players to make that experience good. You have to go in with a team that understands their part and wants to do this. Otherwise, it's chaos. Yeah. Which, to be fair, I was going to say probably would have had the same thing. I remember from some of our testing for the snowball thing, is some kids got it and now, they would steer the snowball this way. And other kids were just, you would just literally see them running around on the snowball. And you're like, no, you're making everybody hit the tree. And they would just delight in it. You're like, oh yeah, okay. It's tough to make games for lots of people at once. So.
All right. So we've gone through the brainstorming of all the Card-Jitsu games you worked on. My next question is, what are some of the specific bugs and challenges that they had? Because I know that Fire got delayed for a few months because you couldn't, things were getting bug tested. And I know that Water had a lot of issues with the Flash player and computers weren't fast enough to handle it and stuff like that.
Yes. So Card-Jitsu Fire, and this will be, in the end, it comes down to me. It's my fault. So how would I explain this? So on Club Penguin, technically you have a server and you have your client sitting on your computer, and they talk back and forth. And there's lots of messages that are going back and forth all at the same time. Each Penguin has sort of a unique ID, like a number, basically, something that says, this is me. And it would listen for those messages. So if you said, here's a message for, Kian, 73056, that message would go to you. And it didn't matter where you were on the island, you would get that message. So when I was doing some of the initial code for this game, for Karjitsu Fire, I had said, what, one of the things we wanted to do was to have the ability that penguins could come in and watch the game without playing it. So you would basically have a viewing gallery. So early on, I put in some code that said, while you were in here, we send these messages around that you could see, basically. So you weren't in the game, but you were watching the game, and these messages were going to you. As we went along, we said, okay, we're not going to do that, but we forgot to take that piece of code out. So what would happen is you would play a fire game and everything was perfect. Scoring was perfect. Everything happened. Penguins were jumping the right spots. You would go to play a second game, and all the people that had been in that game, so your second game would go fine, but then all of a sudden, one of your penguins would do something weird. They might jump across the board, or you get the wrong spin, or the wrong card would show up. Something wrong would happen. And as you've probably figured out by now, because I never took this code out, every time you played a game, you were now sending your messages to yourself and the people you had played with. So your first game went to 4 players. Your second game went to the 4 players that are there, and the 3 that you were playing with, and the 3 others that had played before. And as you played more games, this got worse. So now you're telling everybody in every other game what your moves were, and everybody was doing that. So the end result was your game would start fine, and the more games you played, the more random things would get, because in another game, somebody might attack you or jump across the board, and you would now see that in your game.
Wow, okay. And it was just one line of code that
it was a few lines of code. And then one of the very smart engineers tracked that down finally, and we all just slapped our head. And we were working on it night and day, trying to figure this stupid thing out. And at the end, it's like, oh my gosh, it's the spectator code. And once we commented that out, things went much, much better. So that was my fault. Sorry, I did that.
It's all right.
I mean, there's other things. Yeah, there's other things
I
that were
didn't
going
know
on
it was
too.
late.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tough. That was sort of a big multiplayer game. It was a little different than the other one. So, and there was a lot of changes internally, like the original. So you know how in Fire, how the things spin around and then sort of flip over. That was originally an actual spinner, like you would see on a board game, because we had the board game tie. And very late in the process, it was like, oh no, we can't have that. We want it to be more mystical, more interesting, which was a good decision. I think that was actually, there was a lot of great decisions like that. So I was like, okay. So yeah, things always go wrong, man. When you ship a game, oh yes. Why do you think I have no hair? I use it all up tearing it out of games. So
yeah. All right. And then the next game you worked on would be Karjitsu Water, which just had a lot of issues with running.
It was just too much. One of the problems was we had really good computers at Club Penguin. And so what we were developing seemed like it had a good frame rate. And then once we got it out into the world, you're like, wow, everybody else's computer sucks and ours were too fast. So now it was like, how do you make this faster? So we went back and did tons and tons and tons of optimization to get it to the speed it was at the end. That that was just an oversight. That was just the real world. I like to think of, you make the game as best you can locally and you test it as best you can. And then when you release it into the world, reality starts to kick in. It's like, bang, nope, nope. And you learn what it's really all about and how things actually function. So, and that has never changed since every game I've made since then. You do your best and then you let it out in the world, and it's just going to get, reality is going to beat the heck out of it, and you're going to have to fix it and react and make the game you should have made first. And then you take that knowledge and the next game, you make it as good as you can, and you learn, and it gets better over time by far. So,
All right. And then that was pretty much all I had in mind for this interview. I was just going to ask if there are any like development artwork or like prototypes of those original games, would you be able to share them with me? Or is that kind of classified in the Disney vault?
I think most of that's classified in the Disney vault. I mean, I can tell you ideas of it. It's the problem is Penguin owns most of that sort of stuff. So I don't even know if I have a lot of that. Like the stuff I was showing you. I can tell you, there was an actual Cardjitsu board game as well. There was one that was more like a snakes and ladders or shoots and ladders sort of game, which is one I had developed, where you could. It was more like a typical board game where you were hopping ahead. You roll dice and move ahead, and then you could use the card mechanic to battle people and send them back and forth. But it was all just, it was a big fold out board, like Monopoly sort of sized, that never got released too. So, so we had those type of things. That's something I should talk about. You wanted to talk about Cardjitsu Shadow. So what was interesting is when I was there, because I think the Cardjitsu that the internet sort of talks about, the Cardjitsu Shadow, is different from what I experienced and what I think of it as. So to me, Cardjitsu Shadow was always the first Cardjitsu. So before Fire and Water and Snow, that Cardjitsu by itself is Cardjitsu Shadow. So when you earned your ninja suit, you could become a shadow. And those are all the references in the dojo or to this initial ninja suit, like all those sort of shadowy characters. But as with most things in life, and especially on Club Penguin, sometimes they get woven together differently. And then sometimes at Club Penguin, we would just go with that. If the audience says, I think this is this, and they put all these pieces together, we're like, yeah, that's exactly it. We did that. Yeah, we put those in there. Thank you. And then, then we go off and make it real. So we were heavily influenced. So to me, Cardjitsu Shadow is the first belt you get and the first suit. But when we finished, so we had plans for 4 games. So Cardjitsu Water, Fire, Snow. Once you master all of those games, you become an elemental ninja. And you could wield all 3 elements at once, was where I wanted to take it, sort of thing. When like in the courtyard where you had the 3 temples and we filled them in, when you mastered all 3 of those, the symbol in the middle of the floor, and we had artwork for this, I don't know where it is, but would lower and reveal staircase down to the elemental temple.
Oh, wow.
That's what was going to happen.
That was going to be the 4th game. Okay.
That was the 4th game. So the 4th game wasn't Shadow in my mind. The 4th game was Elemental. And I must have done, dozens of prototypes of how that was going to work. And we hadn't worked it all out. We were like, okay, well, we'll just get Snow out there. And then while Snow is doing, we'll figure out exactly what Elemental is. But yeah, that's about the time I left. So, so the rest of the team there took Snow up and obviously made it something, what they were looking for, what they were interested in at the time. So, I mean, I can, as long as it sort of went with the ninja, like to sum it up, like fire's explosive, fire ninjas are explosive. It's just contained fury, basically. Water is all about sort of slow and powerful. It would be water ninjas. And then fire or snow ninjas are about the power of many, about working together. So you think of, one snowflake means nothing, but a whole bunch of them is an avalanche. So that to me that's snow ninjas. So when they did the snow game, they kept that sort of core, which is working together, sort of thing. And that just led to, in the fourth game, now you basically have different styles of jitsu. So you've got like snow jitsu, fire jitsu, water jitsu sort of thing. And then we're going to wrap it all together. So yeah, that's where we were going with it. And
what were some of the prototypes that you developed for Elemental?
Man, I'm trying to remember if we ever got to code with any of them. I don't think so. I had one. So imagine a circular arena, and you would come in with your team of ninjas, basically. So now imagine sort of 3 viewing areas equidistant apart around the outside. And what you did then was you would use your cards to launch basically balls of whatever element it was. So if you had a 2 of fire, you would launch this little ball of element out onto the arena, in the middle of the arena. If you had a power card, you would launch a great big ball. And it was now you had to sort of point it and almost like a golf swing, figure out how far you could throw it. And then it would land in the arena and capture your area for your team. So that was now your area. And if somebody else wanted to take that area out, they would have to fire a competing element. So I'd have to fire a big ball of water into your fire area. And now I would extinguish your fire and capture it for me. So it was going to be 3 or 4 teams at once, all firing these elements into an arena and trying to capture as much space as you could.
Okay.
Was a prototype that I'm not sure if it actually went anywhere. That was one of the ideas I had, but yeah, there was a bunch. And that's the only one I remember off the top of my head. I think, yeah, off the top of my head, that's the only one I remember. So, and I have, I don't have too much else. So that was the only box I found was that sort of stuff. We're just literally just cleaning up the basement. We had a flood a couple months ago down there, a pipe burst. So now it's a good time to go through it. So I'm almost down to the Karjitsu boxes and to go through it all. So I don't have much that was prototype. I might have a prototype game somewhere. I have one of the original Karjitsu fire. I made them up and we played them just on a square cardboard. I just printed them out. But I've got one that I think the team signed somewhere, but I can't find it. I tried to find it for you, man, but I can't find it this time.
All right, no problem.
Yeah.
Well, all right, I think that's all I had in mind for Karjitsu questions, unless there's anything else you want to bring up or add.
No, I think that's a what, hour rambling or more. So
it was like 40 minutes or so. It's actually pretty quick compared to a lot of interviews I've done. All right, I guess I kind of want to ask you about the missions since you worked on those. I didn't have any questions prepared, but what was the general process for brainstorming a PSA mission and putting it together, and like how long did it take and stuff?
So the general process was, again, we were sort of a small team, which was nice, working in a small team, a very talented individual sort of thing. And we would brainstorm. I think Troy was sort of leading it. Troy had done most of the missions up to that point, and it was a sort of a call back to so he had done some of the initial missions, and each mission we just tried to put more things in. And I think we were trying to do missions every, was it 2 to 3 months? We were trying to turn out a new mission, basically as little time as possible, which was always funny because we would take 3 months to build these things or more, and we would release them. And then, 30 minutes later, you guys had finished the missions. And you're like, we want another one. We're like, okay, give us 3 more months. So it was always a rush there was always pressure on our team to sort of make that as fast as possible because you guys wanted them sort of thing, and you would play them so quickly. As a matter of fact, I started like the gear puzzle is randomly generated every time to try to slow you guys down as the audience.
I never
so it's
noticed.
never the same one.
I've never noticed.
Yes, yeah, because what would happen is people would post the solutions on YouTube as soon as they could, and everybody else would just use that. And then they would just blast through our game, and you're like, oh, come on. So we started trying to think of ways that we could make the content last a little longer, sort of thing. So the process was, we as a little team we had a lot of freedom, which was really good at that point. So we would, usually Troy would we would have a session where we would just kind of come up with ideas. So we throw out ideas. So based on the other missions that had happened and things that were going on, or things that might be going on, we tried to make the missions independent of too many things out in the world, because you didn't want them to rely on, launching a new game or something. So we tried to make them what we call evergreen. So they're always green and always fresh, as it were. So, and they would live forever. So we would sit down and we would just throw out ideas. So it's like, what do you think? What characters we're going to do? And we would get the core of an idea, and then we would just start adding to that. So it's everyone would throw in ideas, and we might start with game ideas too, saying, you know what I like to do? I'd always wanted to do a game like this. Or, from the case of the magnet one, it was like, okay, that machine's going to break. So now, Russ, you got to come up with a game on how you would fix that machine. It's like, okay, what would I do? Okay, so now I got to go out and do some research and sort of say, I could do a soldering thing where you're fixing a circuit board. So it's like, oh, how would you do that? And now I got to go out and find a game mechanic that would work. Oh, the ones where you connect the lines, perfect. And I can generate those randomly, so it's not the same one every time. So that was sort of the game and puzzle sort of mechanic. But yeah, it was really just all of us sitting together, putting out the ideas. And I'm pretty sure it was Troy would come out with the outline of everything. And we may have used some of the writers as well to kind of come in and flesh out some of the dialogue. So it was always funny when because we would bring in kids to test the games before we go out there. And the kids love that because they get to play a game of Club Penguin. Some of our super fans were nearby, and they're like, pick me all the time. And they'd come in and they test it. And invariably, when you did a mission, all of the young boys would click through all the dialogue as fast as they could to play one of the puzzles. And then when there was something to do, they would stop, and now they were interested. And then they would do the thing, and they'd click through all the dialogue again. And you would just see the writer or all of us on the team where you come out with the dialogue, and they just watch us, and they're like, there was jokes in there. You're like, oh, come on, stop. And no, there's jokes. But anytime there was a little girl playing the game, most of them, almost all of them, would read each thing. It was like, click, read, click, oh, and they would laugh. At the times where we put in jokes, they'd laugh, and they would understand the story, and then they would play the puzzles, and then they would go a lot slower. So yeah, it was, our average time was, what we thought it would take you to play a game, and then the time that it was for the boys playing the game, which was how long can I do the puzzles in, sort of thing. It was always kind of funny. So that was a rough process. Get everybody together, throw out a bunch of ideas, slowly fuse those together, and then people would go off, and we'd all sort of work, because we worked in the same room, which was cool. So when the artist is working on something, they could ask you questions. It's like, oh, well, what's the soldering game going to look like, sort of thing. Oh, okay, I'll keep it this big, and it'll be these things here, and you can do the outside. It's got to look like, we just opened something. Okay, that's great. What about the gears? And so there was this wonderful back and forth as, they would draw something, and I may go, oh, that's cool. I can use that, and I'll use it in somewhere else. Or someone's like, hey, what joke could we put here? So, there's a chance to stop and put in a bad pun, as I am wont to do.
So, and with stuff like at the end of that mission 10, like Herbert, the polar bear, drops like a bag of seeds on the ground. When that happened, did you guys have any idea as to where it would go, or you just kind of threw that in as like the cliffhanger and came up with something later?
I think that one we had something specific in mind. So we tried to have some sort of story arc, and we tried to have something at the end of a mission as we got on and doing them. It's like, oh, we want you to play the next mission. So we tried to leave you a bit of a cliffhanger, something interesting where you're like, what is that? Why the seeds, sort of thing? And so that was, then we build on that in the next game, sort of thing. So yeah, it's very different. It's a difference between, it's like very different making a game for somebody and making an experience. It's a difference between eating a meal in a restaurant and running a restaurant. You come together in the same place, but your experience is very different. And when you're making a game like that, and when you think of this, I mean, it's no different than a movie or a book or anything, but someone has sat down and thought out, I want you to feel this thing here. I want you to be angry, surprised, sad, you know, happy, whatever. So we would sit down there and we would try to plot these things out. So yeah, we would put things in deliberately to sort of say, okay, we want you to be thinking about this over the time between the games. We need to give you something to do for 3 months while we're building the next mission. And so we'll leave you these things like the seeds. So yeah, so it was deliberate. But
Quite
that's the reason
planted
behind
a
it.
seed for next time.
Yes, quite literally. Thank you. Thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good.
Well, thank you. That's pretty much all I had in mind. Thank you for talking about those missions as well.
No problem. So
This has been great.
Yeah, it was fun. This is the first interview I've sort of done for Post Penguin. So I thank you. It was kind of fun. I've enjoyed talking with you. And
yeah, Chris recommended you, and yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, no, it was fun. I worked with Chris a bit. He was on the writing team, so we weren't as close together, but yeah, I definitely enjoyed working with everyone there by far. So. But yeah, I think I'm the only, there's definitely other members of the games team. I'm not sure who would go on camera or not. So